Despite sitting on an absolute ocean of black gold and some of the deepest natural gas pockets on the planet, Iran is dark. The state is literally rationing power, forcing everyday folks to scrape by while the regime sits on a fortune. For decades now, the hardline Khamenei administration has essentially sentenced its own population to destitute conditions, hiding their mismanagement behind the propaganda of a so-called resistance economy. But now those excuses are collapsing as the regime stares down its absolute worst-case scenario. The nation's critical energy sector hasn't just faltered. It has joined the uprising currently sweeping across 111 different cities. We are talking about coordinated dissent exploding across roughly 31 provinces. The footage you are looking at right now comes directly from the massive Pars refinery complex, deep in the southern territory. The battle lines have shifted. The real threat to the establishment isn't just the chanting crowds on the boulevards anymore. The revolution has moved inside the control centers and into the machine rooms themselves. While we are still gathering details, reports flooding in from local activist networks and social media feeds suggest a total shutdown with laborers standing their ground and demanding fundamental rights in these leaked clips. This footage didn't just circulate, it caught fire, spreading rapidly across multiple independent media platforms and piercing the regime's information blackout. These aren't just random factory floors. This is the South Pars facility we are talking about, home to one of the single most significant natural gas reservoirs found anywhere on the face of the earth. This one site creates a staggering 70% of the entire nation's gas supply, and in a stunning display of defiance, the operators have walked off the job and left the control rooms completely empty. Just like that, the very production lines that allowed Supreme Leader Khamenei to cozy up to allies in Moscow and Beijing have ground to a screeching halt. Refinery staff didn't just clock out. They organized an immediate work stoppage, openly chanting slogans calling for the death of the dictator and cheering as the machinery powered down. But if South Pars was a jab, the knockout punch landed hundreds of miles away in Avaz, delivering a catastrophic strategic blow to the heart of the regime's wallet. Avaz is the undisputed capital of the Khuzestan province's oil industry. It is the jugular vein of the economy, sitting atop a whopping 80% of the country's crude reserves. The joke there is that you can stick a shovel in the dirt and hit black gold. But historically, it is also the graveyard of dynasties. It was the oil strikes right here that ultimately toppled the Shah. That happened back during the revolution of 1979. And now, as we move through January of 2026, it looks like history is rhyming, if not repeating itself entirely. Verified sources are claiming that the blue-collar workforce at the refineries and oil fields in Avaz has officially joined forces with their comrades down in South Pars. They answered the call for a nationwide general strike, stepping away from their posts to protest the crushing, unbearable pressure the state security apparatus has placed on the working class. Let's be clear about the magnitude here. This isn't just another day of civil unrest with millions of frustrated citizens marching through the city centers. It demonstrates a new level of commitment, proving that the nation's critical energy infrastructure is effectively being held hostage by the people until their demands for change are met. These developments are absolutely critical, threatening to sever the lifeline that keeps the Khamenei regime afloat via its energy diplomacy with partners in Russia and China. To really grasp why this is such a game-changer for the region, we need to circle back and take a closer look at the mechanics of the South Pars facility. The walkouts we are seeing at the Pars refinery are truly just the tip of the iceberg, because this isn't some standard manufacturing plant or a simple warehouse. This complex serves as the beating heart and the central nervous system of the entire Iranian economic structure. It is a gargantuan industrial beast composed of 24 distinct phases that not only keeps the lights on and homes warm, but also feeds raw materials directly into the petrochemical sector. But when the skilled technicians and engineers walk off the site, the consequences are immediate, and operations might not just pause, they could collapse. We are talking about critical pressure drops, massive compressors falling dead silent, and the flow of natural gas to the national power grid flatlining in an instant. Now, there is a specific technical detail we have to highlight, because the true gravity of this crisis and the regime's panic hinges on this one engineering fact. For Iran's aging oil wells to pump efficiently, they need natural gas from South Pars to be re-injected into the ground to maintain pressure. Without that gas, the pressure evaporates. And without that subterranean pressure, the crude oil simply won't rise to the surface, meaning the strike at South Pars isn't just a gas issue, it's an oil catastrophe. It triggers a devastating chain reaction that targets the country's total oil production capacity, a vulnerability the workers exploited intentionally, and one the regime feared most. You can bet the buyers in Beijing waiting on those shipments are going to figure this out very quickly. Meanwhile, the situation on the ground in Khuzestan has taken a violent turn. We are analyzing open-source intelligence and leaked footage from local observers that confirm highly strategic infrastructure points have actually been set ablaze. Government administrative buildings in the area are burning, which is shocking, considering Avaz was supposed to be a secure zone locked down by the regime's iron fist. This area is heavily guarded by the elite Revolutionary Guards, yet despite their presence, the entire city appears to have been engulfed by the uprising overnight. Activity reports around the famous Abadan refinery indicate that the state was forced to pull security forces from the streets just to try and perimeter the production facilities, but those forces looked helpless against the sheer rage of the crowds. For years, the mullahs marketed these sites as untouchable bastions of resistance against Western imperialism. Today, however, the narrative has flipped, and we are witnessing these so-called fortresses being conquered not by foreign armies, but from within. It turns out that a simple wrench in the hand of a disgruntled worker is a far more effective weapon than the regime's multi-billion-dollar ballistic missile program ever could be. Missiles might protect the dictatorship from external threats, but there isn't a piece of military technology in existence that can stop a movement like this. You cannot bomb an economic implosion driven by your own people. The possibility that Avaz could actually be liberated from state control is now a very real scenario. Watching these key facilities fall under the control of the populace is enough to cause a serious cold sweat inside the heavily fortified palaces back in Tehran. And there is a rich irony there. While the leadership sweats in fear, the metaphorical and literal fires that threaten to burn the regime to the ground are only growing hotter. It was right in the middle of this absolute chaos that we witnessed a historic moment, one that perfectly illustrated just how wildly disconnected the ruling class has become. Proving they have completely lost touch with reality, President Masoud Pezeshkian stepped up to the podium and appeared before the television cameras. He spoke as if everything was fine, even as the people were out in the streets chanting for the regime's downfall while the elites trembled in their homes. President Pezeshkian was spotted looking sharp in a stylish designer jacket, likely enjoying the comfort of a climate-controlled VIP room, while the rest of the country burned. He was caught on a hot mic complaining, "I am sweating right now, and I would love to take off this jacket, but official protocol won't let me do it. Honestly, it really shouldn't be this hot in here." Then came the lecture to the public. If you folks would just cut your electricity, gas, and water usage by 10%, we would save 900,000 barrels every single day. But let's be real, we don't care, do we? We just consume everything and then turn around and criticize everyone else. These incendiary remarks, captured in controversial audio recordings now circulating like wildfire on social media, are being viewed as absolute proof of the president's total indifference to the crisis. Pezeshkian's tone-deaf comments didn't just annoy people. They poured gasoline on the fire, fueling the protesters' anger to dangerous new heights. The public response was swift and defiant. People flat out refused to pay their utility bills and began swarming government buildings in massive organized demonstrations. But the fallout from this energy emergency went way beyond just a simple heating crisis or uncomfortable temperatures. Widespread power and internet outages have completely wiped out Iran's already fragile industrial production line, with steel factories, cement plants, and major petrochemical complexes reportedly shutting down operations entirely. Unemployment has skyrocketed to completely unmanageable levels, battering an economy that was already on life support and in deep crisis. But even more critical than the economic hit was the devastating impact these power outages had on the nation's communications infrastructure. While the regime scrambled to throttle internet speeds to block the digital networks organizing the protests, the power failures backfired and knocked out cell towers completely. This blackout didn't just silence the people. It severed the regime's own line of communication with its security forces on the ground. Severe breaches in the chain of command meant that local police units were left flying blind, unable to receive orders from headquarters, and deciding on their own initiative to retreat. The withdrawal of security forces from the main square in Avaz and other major cities wasn't a strategic move. It was seen as a direct result of this total communication and logistical chaos. Now let's zoom out and turn the camera to a much wider angle, specifically looking at the panic inside the strategic planning rooms in Beijing and Moscow. Because this total collapse inside Iran is not just Supreme Leader Khamenei's problem to deal with anymore. It represents a fatal blow to the energy security of the entire anti-Western bloc in Eurasia, often referred to as the modern axis of evil. For years, Khamenei has been funneling resources that he effectively cut from his own people's throats and sending them straight to China and Russia. While his own citizens sat in the dark, he made the choice to feed China's factories with cheap oil and supply Russia's war machine with drones. But now in early 2026, he is finally paying the steep price for this dangerous strategic gamble. From China's perspective, the terrifying possibility of workers at energy facilities joining the anti-regime movement in Iran is an absolute nightmare scenario. This is because China is Iran's single largest oil customer, with more than 90% of Iran's crude oil flowing to China via ghost fleets to dodge United States sanctions. We are talking about a massive volume of approximately 1 million barrels of oil hitting Chinese shores every single day. China's independent refineries are completely dependent on this cheap Iranian oil, which is sold at a massive discount of $10 per barrel compared to Brent crude prices. However, the widespread strikes and sudden production decline in Navaz threaten to severely disrupt this vital supply chain. There's a very real possibility that energy production in Iran could slow down significantly or stop altogether as the protests continue to spread. Therefore, those massive tankers currently waiting in Chinese ports could end up leaving completely empty-handed. Reports indicate that independent refineries in China's Shandong region have only about 21 days of reserves left. Without that Iranian oil, a situation that could force Beijing to pivot to much more expensive alternatives like Russia or Saudi Arabia. This translates to significantly increased costs for Chinese industry and a major loss of competitiveness in the global market. China was banking heavily on the famous 25-year strategic partnership agreement it signed with Tehran. This agreement envisioned Iran receiving massive investment in exchange for providing China with a guaranteed, uninterrupted flow of energy. However, the striking workers on the ground could effectively tear up this agreement in the coming weeks. The burning question that is likely being asked behind closed doors in Beijing right now is this: if Khamenei cannot even control the oil valves in his own country, how is he going to protect our $400 billion investment? The Chinese government prizes stability above all else, and right now the Iranian regime is looking like the definition of instability. This situation is a massive crisis of confidence that may cause China to rethink its entire Middle East policy and perhaps even reconsider its support for the Tehran regime. Meanwhile, on the Russian front, the situation appears even more complex and potentially dangerous. Moscow likely views Iran not just as an energy partner, but as a critical logistical bridge to help them circumvent Western sanctions. The North-South transport corridor is Russia's vital gateway to India and Asian markets, and that gateway runs directly through Iran. However, the chaos in the streets of Iran, the strikes paralyzing the railways, and the energy cuts may have effectively blocked this corridor. The uninterrupted logistical flow that Russia desperately needs to sustain its war in Ukraine is being disrupted by the internal turmoil tearing Iran apart. More importantly, Russia and Iran were collaborating closely within OPEC Plus to manipulate global oil prices. However, Iran's uncontrolled production loss could throw the entire market balance out the window. While a sudden 2 to 3% spike in global oil prices might seem to benefit Russia's wallet in the short term, the long-term collapse of a key ally like Iran is eroding Putin's strategic depth in the region. If Iran falls or even weakens significantly, Russia's presence in Syria and its influence in the Caucasus are in serious jeopardy. Even the regime's pivotal status as a regional power broker in the Middle East is now hanging by a thread, facing an existential threat unlike any before. Supreme Leader Khamenei desperately attempted to secure his position by cozying up to superpowers, effectively trading the welfare of his own population for political insurance. Under his controversial pivot to the East strategy, he went all in betting the entire future of the nation on a partnership with Beijing and Moscow that is looking shakier by the day. But in a twist of cruel irony for the mullahs, that so-called Eastern safety net is fraying, as those allies are likely looking for the nearest exit strategy to avoid getting burned by the fires consuming Iran. The reality is cold and transactional. Neither China nor Russia has any interest in loading more heavy cargo onto a ship that is already taking on water and listing heavily to one side. Washington insiders view these crippling strikes as the definitive collapse of Khamenei's foreign policy doctrine because, let's be honest, without a functioning energy sector, Iran's strategic utility to its allies drops to absolute zero. Yet the diplomatic deep freeze and the evaporation of trust from global powers are merely the surface-level symptoms of a much deeper terminal illness facing the Khamenei administration. The true catastrophe is unfolding internally, tearing apart the massive clandestine financial web that has acted as the regime's life support system for decades. We are talking about the deep pockets and secret ledgers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Praetorian Guard that effectively owns the country. To really get a handle on this situation in 2026, you have to realize that Iran isn't running a traditional state economy anymore. It functions more like a massive, corrupt holding company. And sitting in the chairman's office, acting as the ruthless CEO of this conglomerate, is none other than the Revolutionary Guard itself. Intelligence reports suggest that roughly 60% of the nation's entire oil, natural gas, petrochemical, and construction industries are controlled either openly or through shell corporations by the guards. Massive industrial entities like the Qatam headquarters have wrapped their tentacles around the nation's critical infrastructure, suffocating the free market like a giant octopus. So when a blue-collar worker in Avaz decides to shut off a pipeline valve, he isn't just making a labor statement or going on strike against the government. He is effectively declaring open warfare on the personal bank accounts, the luxury lifestyles, and the operational war chests of the Revolutionary Guard generals themselves. The second that pipeline money stops flowing due to these labor strikes, the chain of command and loyalty among Khamenei's elite enforcers is destined to rust out and snap apart. We are getting credible reports from the ground backed up by open-source intelligence analysts painting a very grim picture for the regime's stability. It appears that lower-level officers and foot soldiers within the Revolutionary Guards are already seeing their paychecks bounce or facing significant delays in salary disbursement. And there is an old, undeniable truth in military history that every dictator should remember but often forgets until it is too late. When soldiers stop getting paid, they don't aim their weapons at the foreign enemy. They turn their sights on the palace, and this energy paralysis might be the spark for a full-blown mutiny. The fallout from this grid failure is doing a lot more than just plunging the neighborhoods of Tehran into total darkness and chaos. It is blacking out the entire network of Iranian influence and terror support that stretches all the way from the suburbs of Beirut down to Sana'a. For decades, Tehran has siphoned off its oil wealth to bankroll Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militia proxies across Syria. These groups served as Iran's forward operating bases, a defensive line meant to catch any stones thrown at Tehran before they could even cross the border. But suddenly, the ATM has been unplugged and the screen reads insufficient funds. No oil revenue means no American dollars, which translates to no rockets, no bullets, and no payroll for terrorists. The total shutdown of production at the South Pars gas field is indirectly signing the death warrant for Hezbollah's logistical capabilities and operational readiness. When the Khamenei regime loses the ability to feed and arm this proxy network, what they like to call their strategic depth, their ability to deter regional attacks, essentially collapses. To put it in plain English, that single strike action down in Avaz may have just tipped over the first domino in a massive geopolitical crash. Another critical vulnerability exposed by this energy crisis is the gaping holes it is tearing in Iran's cyber defense grid and its nuclear security protocols. Rolling blackouts don't just rot food in residential refrigerators. They shut down the advanced cooling systems and firewalls protecting top-secret military sites. And here's the kicker: when the regime throttles the internet bandwidth or cuts access entirely to try and silence the protesters organizing in the streets, they are inadvertently blinding their own defense radars and communication systems, leaving them wide open to external threats. Furthermore, the crisis management we are seeing suggests there are no rational adults left in the room. The sheer panic at the leadership level is evident in their erratic behavior. You have officials begging for a national dialogue on Monday, and by Tuesday, they are screaming about treason and threatening mass arrests, showing zero consistency. These schizophrenic mood swings in government policy are the clearest indicator yet that they have completely lost their grip on the steering wheel. Compounding the disaster is the state of the energy sector itself, which was already barely hanging on by a thread after years of crushing international sanctions and zero meaningful investment. Critical maintenance was ignored, repairs were skipped, and aging technology was never replaced, leaving the entire grid in a fragile state. Now, with the workers walking off the job, this rotting industrial structure is finally buckling and collapsing under the weight of its own neglect. What we are witnessing in this final act is the concrete, undeniable manifestation of a regime that is spiraling toward its ultimate demise. While pundits are drawing frightening parallels between today's chaos and the revolution of 1979, there is a massive fundamental difference this time around. Back when the Shah was ousted in '79, the revolutionaries were driven by a promise, a vision of hope, and a clear alternative waiting in the wings. When the oil workers struck back then, it was to build a new order. Today, the motivation on the streets isn't hope, but pure, unadulterated rage and desperation. Plus, the current regime lacks the deep financial reserves the Shah had, and they certainly don't have any friends left in the international community to bail them out. Khamenei finds himself in the unenviable position of a treasurer who has lost the keys to the vault and finds the safe empty anyway. In the coming days, keeping the lights on in the Supreme Leader's compound won't depend on how much diesel is left in the backup generators, but on the temperature of the anger boiling over outside. And by the looks of it, that rage is radiating enough heat to melt right through whatever security barricades the regime has left standing. We are witnessing a seismic strategic shift in how this revolution is being fought. The decisive battles are no longer just taking place on the front lines with protesters in the streets. The gravity of the conflict has moved directly into the refinery control rooms, the economic nerve center of the regime. And make no mistake, reports indicate that those critical facilities are now firmly under the command of the people. This is a game-changing development with massive geopolitical implications, and I want to hear your take on this immediately. What is your assessment of this escalation? Do you believe that paralyzing the national energy sector is the silver bullet that will finally corner Supreme Leader Khamenei and force a regime collapse? It is a high-stakes scenario that could reshape the entire region, and I am incredibly eager to see your analysis and predictions down in the comment section. Keep your eyes locked right here for the raw, unfiltered truth as we continue to track this developing story around the clock.